Hi, welcome to Too Fond of Books, and welcome to Jane Austen July. I am so excited for this upcoming month where we read Jane Austen books, we read books about Jane Austen, we read retellings and modern day adaptations, and we watch movies about Jane Austen and Jane Austen's books, and I am just super excited for what's coming up this month. And I thought I would get it started with a bang doing a page to screen video about Sense and Sensibility. I recently reread this, and I also recently rewatched a couple adaptations, and so I thought this was the perfect time to do a page to screen about Sense and Sensibility. I love this story. It is so fantastic. I gave it 5 stars, easy, no question. I love it. Persuasion is still my favorite Jane Austen, but Sense and Sensibility was such a great story. So if you don't know kind of the gist of Sense and Sensibility, it is a story about Eleanor and Marianne, who are sisters, and at the beginning of the book their father dies and their home is entailed to their half-brother John, and he and his wife and their son quickly move into Norland Park, and Mrs. Dashwood, Eleanor, Marianne, and Margaret suddenly have nowhere to live and very little money to live on. And so they move to Dorset, to a cottage on a cousin's estate. Sir John Middleton offers them a cottage to live in. And it's about who they meet in Dorset, and primarily about how they're going to survive, and whether or not they will marry for money or for love, which is often what happens in Jane Austen. And I just really enjoyed this book. There were a few quotes that I wanted to share with you, and one aspect of the story that I wanted to talk about, and then I'm going to talk about a couple of the adaptations, and we'll just discuss how this story was adapted for the screen. So the first quote that I wanted to share with you was a description that that Jane Austen does. Now, this is the second volume. Sense and Sensibility is a story written in 3 volumes, and in the second volume, we have Lady Middleton is married to Sir John Middleton, and she meets Mrs. John Dashwood. So the girl's half-brother John, his wife Mrs. Dashwood. Now, both of these women, Lady Middleton and John Dashwood's wife, are quite the characters. But I absolutely adore this description of the meeting of the pair of them. Lady Middleton was equally pleased with Mrs. Dashwood. There was a kind of cold-hearted selfishness on both sides, which mutually attracted them, and they sympathized with each other in an insipid propriety of demeanor and a general want of understanding. Brilliant. I absolutely love how Jane Austen can write 2 sentences that give you such a great understanding of both of those characters. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And then in the 3rd volume, now, I'm going to get spoilery with these quotes and with what I'm talking about, so I'll put spoiler on the screen here. If you haven't read this book yet and you don't want to be spoiled for what happens, then maybe fast forward a bit. But I wanted to share this quote because it was so good. So, Eleanor has married Edward. Sorry, I totally blanked there for a second. Edward and Eleanor have married, and I absolutely loved this sentence. They had, in fact, nothing to wish for but the marriage of Colonel Brandon and Marianne, and rather better pasturage for their cows. Sorry, I love it. It's so good. Okay. And then we learn a little bit about maybe some of the reconciliation that happens between Mrs. Ferris and her sons, and how she comes to treat Edward and Robert in the wake of all that happens. But though Mrs. Ferris did come to see them, Edward and Eleanor, and always treated them with the make-believe of decent affection, they were never insulted by her real favor and preference. Brilliant. Brilliant. And then finally, Lucy and Robert. The whole of Lucy's behavior in the affair, and the prosperity which crowned it, therefore, may be held forth as a most encouraging instance of what an earnest and unceasing attention to self-interest, however its progress may be apparently obstructed, will do in securing every advantage of fortune, with no other sacrifice than that of time and conscience. Brilliant. Again, such a great way to give you just such a good understanding of character. I love Jane Austen. She is brilliant. Now, one thing that I noticed when I read this time around, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who's noticed this, was that there are 3 pairs of sisters in this story. So, of course, primarily you get Eleanor and Marianne. And Eleanor is a more private person. She keeps her feelings to herself. She is the sense in Sense and Sensibility. So she is a little more rational, a little more aware of society's rules and how to treat other people. Marianne is the sensibility of Sense and Sensibility. Her emotions are right on the surface. It is very easy to tell what she is feeling. She doesn't think that she needs to adapt her feelings to other people. They should adapt to her. And so you get these very different sisters, Eleanor and Marianne. But very interestingly, there are another pair of sisters, and that is Lady Middleton and Mrs. Palmer. And I find them fascinating as a pair of sisters. Of course, these are minor characters, but we get to know them enough to see that Lady Middleton and Mrs. Palmer, like Eleanor and Marianne, sometimes you wonder, how are these two related to each other? They are so different. Lady Middleton is described as cold and insipid. And, I mean, she apparently loves her children, but she does not show emotions. So in that sense, she's like she's like Eleanor. But unlike Eleanor, she is cold and insipid and snobbish. And then Mrs. Palmer is like Marianne, where she's just open and all of her emotions are out there, and she somehow managed to marry a man who is her opposite. He is, very droll and very calm and rational and does not show a lot of emotion. And so her and Lady Middleton are very different, and in a way they're like Eleanor and Marianne, and in other ways very different from Eleanor and Marianne. Mrs. Palmer is very like Mrs. Jennings, her mom, the same way as Marianne is very like Mrs. Dashwood, their mom. So I think that's an interesting pair of sisters. But then we also have Lucy Steele and her sister Nancy, I think. And again, we don't get a ton of information about these two sisters, but they are also very different from each other. Nancy is the older sister in this case, but she is the flamboyant one, the one who is out there, and her emotions just, are right there, and she babbles away about beaux and, just can't keep a secret and all that. So she's, kind of like Marianne or Mrs. Palmer. And then you get Lucy, who in the pairing of sisters is actually like Eleanor in a way, where she and probably in this case, because of the situation, she has to keep things close to her chest. She can't show her emotions, maybe if she wants to, the way she wants to, but she has to keep secrets, and she has to hold everything in and be more calm and sedate. And so I just found that very interesting, to consider the three pairs of sisters in this book. And so if anyone else has any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear what you think about those three pairs of sisters in this book. Yeah, so that's that. So let's talk about the adaptations. There's two that I watched recently that I want to talk about. And the first one is the 1995 movie version of Sense and Sensibility, adapted by Emma Thompson. I adore this adaptation. It is not 100% accurate, but I forgive it because it is so good. The cast in this film is unbelievable. They are so good. And because of that, I forgive so much about what is left out or maybe wrong in the screenplay. I will forgive it because the cast is unbelievable. So Emma Thompson plays Eleanor, Kate Winslet plays Mary Ann. Their mother is played by, oh, I should have looked this up, but it's just so good. Hugh Grant is Edward, and Alan Rickman is Colonel Brandon, and even Mr. and Mrs. Palmer are fantastic. I love them as actors, and they are so good in this role. Mrs. Jennings and John Middleton are amazing. So I forgive so much because the cast is so good in this film, and the music, the soundtrack is also really, really good. And even though a lot of the story had to be condensed, characters had to be removed, which I understand. If you're going to try and tell this story in an hour and a half, or in this case, I think it was about 2 hours, you have to get rid of stuff, or you just can't do it. And so, even that aside, the screenplay is fantastic. The dialogue is amazing. Emma Thompson took so much straight out of the book. The dialogue straight out of the book. And so yeah, I highly recommend this as a movie adaptation. It's not perfect. They don't have Lucy's sister is not a character in here. Sir John Middleton is a widower instead of having Lady Middleton and his children. And so there are a few things that are different, but it is so good, and I highly recommend this film. And then, as far as a TV miniseries adaptation, I recently watched, again, Sense and Sensibility, adapted by Andrew Davies, and this is from 2008. Yes. And this is also really good, but in different ways. And in a way, I think it's perfectly acceptable to love both of these just as much, because this is a movie adaptation and this is a TV series adaptation. And for that reason, because there are multiple episodes in here, they are able to tell so much more of the story. And so all the characters are in here, scenes are in here that are not in this one. And I just really liked how they chose to tell this story. And so some of the stuff that you get later in the book as backstory, Andrew Davies chose to put right at the beginning of this film to give you an idea of where the story's going, and I liked that. And the cast in here is so good. The music is great. And so I actually can't really decide which one I like better. I actually like them equally, these two, but for different reasons. And so, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. So as far as recommendations go, I can recommend both of these. But can I say, read the book. Read the book first or again and then watch the movies again. You'll get so much more out of the movies, but the book is so, so good. So that is my page to screen of Sense and Sensibility to kick off Jane Austen July. Have you read Sense and Sensibility yet? I'd love to talk about it with you down in the comment section down below. Have you seen either of these adaptations? What were your thoughts? I know they're not perfect, either of them, but I'd love to hear what you think about them. And I will see you for another video soon. Bye.